Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode from the RPA Vanguard channel. My name is Andy Menon. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at the OpenAI Integration Service connector from UiPath. Let's get started. So as most of you already know, the OpenAI connector was talked about during the recent UiPath AI Summit. And I want to take a quick look at this, even though it's in the preview state, right? And therefore, whatever you're going to hear and see in this video is going to be within the confines of the fact that this OpenAI connector is still in the preview state, right? So I'm here in the integration service page of my automation cloud instance, and I'm going to take a look at the preview connectors. So I'm going to apply, sort of tune the filter here, and then go into OpenAI, right? And this is the OpenAI connector that we'll be looking at in this video, right? So clicking on this connector, I already have created a connection, but if in case we want to create a new connection, we will need an API key, right? Which would be something that you will get once you create an account at the OpenAI site, right? So if you haven't gotten started yet, you have to go to OpenAI, and then once you sign up with your or create an account, and once you get in there, you will go to your profile, and in your profile is a page for the API keys, right? Which if you click on it, it will take you to this page here. And when you hit this Open API keys page, there would not be any keys if you're here for the first time. So you got to generate a new secret key. One thing you have to be mindful of is the fact that you will get to see this key only once and copy it only once. So when you hit this button, you're going to see the key and you copy it. And once you do that, those keys will not be visible here on your profile, right? And therefore, please be careful about keeping your keys safe, right? And so that you have access to them when you need them, right? So that is the bare minimum that you will need if you are going to be using the UiPath OpenAI connector, right? But I'm going to add another item here. If you go to your organization menu on the left and get into your settings, right, you will see an organization key, right? Now, when you sign up for OpenAI, when you create a new account, you will be asked for an organization name, right? And that organization name will be internally recorded with a unique key, and that's the org key or the organization key, right? So we are not going to be using that for OpenAI connector in the UiPath integration service, but we will be using it later in one part of the video where I'm going to hop into another environment briefly, right? So keep the organization key and the API keys handy, because we'll be needing it if you are following along with the content of this video, right? So now that you are ready with the API key, the next thing would be for you to come back to integration service, and as usual is the case, create a new connection, right? So if I hit add connection, so when you hit the page, you are going to see this connection box, and then all you got to do is plug in your API key and then hit connect, right? So once you hit connect, your connection will be created here. And one of the things that I noticed is pretty odd is that this box just keeps spinning if I cancel out of the new connection window, right? And it would keep rotating endlessly. So if you want that to go away, just hit refresh, right? And that spinning is going to stop. So that's something I guess UiPath needs to fix on this page. But that aside, you will see your connection here, and just to make sure you are okay with your connection, you hit check and confirm that your connection is already working. So that's pretty much it on the automation cloud side of things. And now we are ready to hop into Studio and begin using this OpenAI connector, right? And for that, you got to go to the connector documentation, which will take you to this page here. And here is the OpenAI activities package, right? There is this brief documentation about how to use this activity. So we hop into Studio, and once you create a new project, you get into your package manager and you add the OpenAI Integration Service activities to your project, right? OpenAI Integration Service .activities package to your project, right? Once you've done that, there is something that you might face, because I faced it, and I'm going to just mention that here. So once you've imported the package into your project and then you look for OpenAI, you will see the generate chat completion and generate text completion. So obviously I'm interested in the most latest generate chat completion. When you pull this into your main designer surface, right, it's possible that your studio might crash, right? This happened to me, and my studio was updated a few days ago, and the version is 2023 4.0, right? And this was the first project that I created after that update. So when you add the connector in, Studio is going to flash this message. I also reported that to UiPath, and you can see that it says Studio closed due to a critical internal error. I don't know why that happened, but if it does happen, allow the Studio to crash, restart it, and then when you add your connector the next time, hopefully things should be good. Now, in my case, when I added this back, the connection was by default listed in this dropdown. So if you have more than one connection, it's obvious that you got to set the connection, one connection as default. So if I go back into this, back to this page here, if you have more than one connection here, then you're going to set one of the connections as default, and that connection will show up in this box, right? That's why it says default and the name of the connection, right? Okay. So the next thing is to set up this connector, right? We configure this connector. Most of the properties are in the properties pane. So I'm going to pull this out a little bit. And here is the tone that's already been set by default. The instruction tells or instructs the ChatGPT model assistant that, hey, whatever question I'm asking, please respond to me as a helpful assistant, right? And then the tokens, right? We'll get back to this, but for now, just let's not touch this. Let's say the max tokens are 1920, which is the default here, but it's actually 4096. And then the number of responses that you are going to expect back. And again, this depends on the question that you're trying to ask, because some of the questions will have a simple answer, right? It's only one response that you're interested in. You might not be interested in like 10 responses, right? It all depends on the question. Then obviously there is the temperature. The more the value, the more random the responses might be, right? So if we go to the documentation, we can see that here. If I go back into the documentation page and take a look at the configuration, right? So you see that it's a value between 0 and 2, and the higher that is, the more random it becomes. So you have to be prepared to handle the randomness of the responses received. And therefore, I think UiPath has set that to a mid-range value of 1, right? And then coming back to Studio, the other thing is streaming. That is, if the response is not completed, then the stream when you enable stream, more responses would stream back into your connection pipeline, which you must be ready to handle, right? And then most of the other the other parameters, you could leave them default, because once you get to know how to use these as an advanced user, then you could start like changing these responses. For example, the frequency penalty states that there is a penalty on the amount of repeatability of certain things in your response, right? And if you want to penalize that response, then it would prompt the model to not repeat the same thing over and over again, right? And you can see that documentation, again, the easiest way to understand that in a short burst is to go back to this frequency penalty, right? And positive values penalize new tokens based on their existing frequency in the text so far, right? And that means if you impose penalty on the model for repeating the same thing, then the model is most likely to not repeat things that it has said before. Okay. Next would be the output. And the two things that you might be interested in configuring, obviously one is optional. The response is an object. It's API response, right? It's a generic object. And then if you are interested in the first response, right, the topmost response, then you assign a variable and you can name it anything, but I have named it top generated text and the object as API response, right? And in this case, if n is set to 1, which is if you go back into the document and look at what n is, right? Here are the number of completion choices. That is, most often than not, it's one answer that you're interested in. But if it is 1, if this is set to 1, then your top generated response will be the response generated by that's present in the API response. That's pretty much it, right? And this makes more sense and becomes more relevant if you are having more than one response. So if n is 1, then you get back only one response, and that is the top generated text as well, right? Okay. So once you do this and hit run, I don't think you're going to face any problems unless your API key is wrong or there is some other issue. You will get back the response in your API response object. And then there are a couple of ways to actually get at what you're interested in. And that is the response sent back or the token sent back by the model, right? So in this project, what I've done is I have gone the longhand way of getting the responses because I wanted to understand how that object would look like. And then I go down to the, the direct shorthand response. So what I've done is I've run this project and I've pulled out the response and I have put it into Notepad++, right? If I look into the logs and say, give me the API response object, then I get a very long JSON here. What I was able to parse out successfully was message. How do I go in stages to get this response out, right? So the topmost object is generate chat completion. That's your API response object. So this is API response object. And if I go to the next tab and go all the way up and I start parsing this out here, if I look at API response.choices of 0, I get the next object, and that object has this message in here, right? Which is another structure, right? Which is another object. And then if I go one level down and say response, API response.choices of 0.message, I get that message object. And then the message object in turn has got content. And this is actually the content that we are interested in, right? This is the actual usable response, right? So if I say API response.choices of 0.message.content, I get this information out. So this is the longhand way of getting your response out. You can simply use this to get your response. But the reason I wanted to go in this this longhand fashion is because I wanted to understand what else is there in this object that comes back, right? And there's a lot of information here that we can pull out. And one of the most important information that we can pull out is the metrics of your request and response cycle, right? And when we're talking about metrics, we're talking about tokens. Okay, so scrolling down to this very large object here, when we come down here, you can see that there is another object called usage, right? This is what we are interested in. And so if I go back and request API response.usage, I get this object, a dictionary, right? And it has 3 attributes. And if I request each of them, API response.usage.completion tokens, I get the size of the response. And then obviously, if I say prompt tokens, that's the size of the question or the prompt that I sent in my request. And obviously 149 is the sum of the 115 and 34, which is 149 that is in total tokens. This is important because today you are actually sending a request and getting a response back, and there is no context involved. But if you're going to be sending or having contextual conversations with the model, then over API, the context is not remembered by the model, or the model does not remember the context between your API requests, which means that you have to take the response that you received in your previous request and then send it along with your new question. But therein lies the catch. If you have received a very long response for your previous question, and if you take that and plug it into your next question and send the request, you're going to burn your tokens, right? Your token usage is just going to spike. So that is what I guess is the essence of prompt engineering, is how do we send an optimal request by keeping our token usage very low, right? And I ran into some confusion. I don't know whether there is someone here out in the audience who has a better idea of how this works, but I found some of these things a bit confusing, and therefore I have to play around with it a little more to understand how it works. But for starters, what I did was I took this question that I sent to ChatGPT, right? Here is the question that I sent. Now you can see why I asked this question to ChatGPT, because I wanted to know how I can reduce the size of my context, right? By taking the previous response received, right? Reduce it down in a way that the model can understand and still maintain context, right? That way I get to maintain my context, but also not burn through my tokens, right? So this is the question I asked ChatGPT. This is the OpenAI tokenizer. It helps you sort of get a measure of what it's going to cost you in terms of tokens when you send the response up there, or when you send your request up there. So I took my question and I plugged it into the tokenizer, right? My question was, show me an example of how to shorten a long paragraph down to a few words. I wanted to ask the model, how do I learn to have a contextual conversation with you? If I get a long response, how will I reduce that down and send you the next question so that you can understand the context of the conversation that I'm trying to have with you? Here it says that it is 16 tokens. right? Which looks okay, but then when I go back to the reply received from the API, it told me that it has burned through 34 tokens, right? The prompt token is 34. So I don't know whether it's the sum total of the text plus something else that goes up there. But here's the first difference I see. This should cost me only 16, but it's saying 34. So that's something that I found a bit of disconnect between the tokenizer tool here and what was returned by the OpenAI connector. That's about the question. And then I got the response back. And I think doing this for a few times, we will probably have the possibility of learning how to shorten our conversations and maintain context. So I'll take the response that I received from the API, the whole response that I received, just between the quotes, and I'm going to plug it back into the tokenizer, right? Now it gave me an example. Every day the example is going to be different. The other day I tried one, I got one example, and today I'm getting a different example. It says, look, here is an example of an original paragraph. It's pretty long. So you can imagine what's going to happen as is. If you look at this, it's 131 tokens, right? So if you're going to send the context back, you ought to be ready to burn through 131 tokens plus your next question, right? Which is a bit more than the 131 tokens. But when I plug this response in, I got my answer. It says, look, this is the longhand text, and I shortened it for you. And this is the response. This is something that you can use to shorten your conversation, right? And I'm going to try this out later in a contextual conversation. I'm going to look at this, and this is exactly not a contextual conversation, but I have something else in mind and I may play with it. But here you can see how it has shortened a paragraph down to a few words, right? But the first thing that I noticed was the total size of it was 131, but when I went back to my stats, it said 115. So what I did was I started by cleaning out all the line breaks and the quotes, everything. And I got back, I sort of cut this down to as much as possible. And you can see the tokens just keep going down, right? So I remove the line breaks, and then I'm going to do the same here, 120, and then I go up here and I remove that break too. I was able to get it down to 116, right? And my response that was received was 115 tokens long. And only after I removed the end full stop, the full stop all the way at the end, I was able to match the 115 tokens with the response that was received from OpenAI, from the OpenAI connector, right? So you see, it's not always about what you plug into the tokenizer, right? I think there is much more to this, because the response that I received as is when I saw it in my response, if this response is taken and simply plugged in to your next contextual conversation, it's going to cost you 131 tokens, right? But if you actually remove everything that's not required, then you probably can cut down the amount of tokens required, right? This is something to be experimented with, and to understand how we can actually have an interaction with the large language model in a way that it will not burn our tokens up, right? So this is something that I think with experience we'll know. But there is also the challenge of how do we do this when we are writing or building an application, right? Let us say that we're building a chat application that helps us interact with an AI. that application must be capable of taking this response, reducing it down to a shorter text, and sending it back to in the next request. So that's going to be a challenge, and that's something I guess only time will tell how all of that is going to shape up. But for now, I think that we'll have to experiment or find another model that will help us reduce this down to a single line of conversation that can be sent back to the large language model. Before the OpenAI connector from UiPath came along, I was playing around with some of the OpenAI's APIs, and I was sort of stuck in this place on how to kind of optimize my prompts, right? I have done this in Python, so if you are comfortable in Python, that's great. But I think if you know any programming language, then using these APIs is not going to be a big problem. And of course, if you don't have other options, you can use UiPath's API connector to not the OpenAI connector, but the general connector, API connector to tap into these APIs. So what you're looking at here is the use of an API called tick token, right? The tick token is kind of an API interface, just like the tokenizer. And what it helps you do is get a measure of how many tokens your interaction is going to cost you without sending the request to the model, right? So you take your request, you shape your request, and then you put it through the tick token API. It's going to come back and tell you that this is the number of tokens that it might cost you. So what I did was I took the API example of tick token, and I applied my own content to it. Basically, the idea was to see if the model could tell me if something was a name, place, animal, or a thing, right? And I set the mood of the assistant to be a game player, right? And it is playing the game, name, place, animal, and things, right? And then I gave it a few examples of names, and then animals, and then places. And then my question was, if I give it a collection of objects, will it come back and say it is a thing, right? So I wanted to know how many tokens that this would take, right? The request, the response, and the combined count of those, right? The total tokens. When you send this request to tick token, it will send you back the response. And if I run this in Python, one of the things that you have to make sure is, I think you need a minimum Python 3.8 version. If you're having anything below that, it might not work. And then you also would have to pull in the tick token object, and you also have to install the OpenAI library, right? So please do keep that in mind if you're going to be running this Python script. And I have set up a virtual environment for 3.9.6. And if I run this, it says 102 prompt tokens counted. That's the response I got, right? So it's going to cost me 102 tokens if I send this request through, right? And then what I did was I actually placed this request, and I'm not going to run this because I've burned through enough tokens for the day, but I sent this message through to the model. I gave my org ID, and this is why I said at the beginning of the video that as far as UiPath OpenAI connector is concerned, you just need the API key, but the org ID you will require if you are doing something like this from Python or any other a programming language interface to place your API request, right? So I gave it my organization ID and then the API key, and then of course the model, and then sent the message through. And I set the temperature to 0 so that it isn't erratic. And then I did get the response back. And if you observe this message, it's a normal message. It has normal, spaces. There isn't anything. There are no line breaks, but they are single line content, basically. And I got a response back saying that my normal message used 104, whereas tick token said 102, right? So a little bit of a difference there. What I did was I thought that maybe I'll minify this message and send it again to see if I can burn lesser tokens, right? So what I did was I disabled this message, and then I enabled this message, and it almost looks the same, but if you look carefully, there are no blank spaces. There are no spaces within the the words, and I removed all blank spaces, but I kept the structure intact. But a funny thing happened when I sent this request. I got a higher count. This was 2 weeks ago. This was as of March 17th. I got 107. So even though I minified my content, this was March 17th, I think 2 weeks ago, it was an output of 107. So this is something to note when you're tokenizing and sending prompts out there, because this was an easy way out, but this does not work. If I take this here, if I take this minified sentence here and go back to the tokenizer, right? I delete this and I put it in here, I get about 13 tokens. If I restore it back to normalcy, it's 14 tokens, right? So if I now remove all the spaces again, there's very little change. So I don't think that this is going to matter at all. And therefore, what I think is it requires a little more finesse when it comes to trying to have a contextual conversation with the large language model. And we'll need to seriously think about how to take a larger response, such as the one that the large language model exemplified and sent it back, and reduce it down to a manageable chunk that you can then try to send back to the model in order to have a context-based conversation. So that is all for this video. I hope you liked my initial take on the OpenAI connector from UiPath Integration Service, and also some of the things that I explored on the API front in Python. I'm going to share this with you, and I hope you find this content useful in your further exploration of OpenAI. If you like the content of this video, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll truly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.